Who we are, who we were, and who we're destined to become are all reflections of the stories we tell, of gods and devils, from tales of the heart to those of fear and foreboding. Stories shape us and the world we live in. Myths, folk tales, and even religious parables all define our cultures and beliefs. In each episode of Faith and Fear, we will dip our toes into the comparative narratives spanning the globe, considering the concepts and archetypes common to us all. Welcome. Enle Shalom and Prazir. Hello and peace. It's a pleasure. I want to thank you for stopping by and lending me your ear for a while. I like mythology. I love old school folklore, and I love stories in general. There's just something about them and the way they represent people and their cultures. That's why I've been looking forward to starting this podcast, where each week we'll be exploring different concepts or archetypes prevalent in cultures and beliefs around the world. Portuguese writer and Nobel Prize recipient José Saramago once said, "All stories are like those about the creation of the universe. No one was there, no one witnessed anything, yet everyone knows what happened." This being my inaugural episode, it was clear to me where I wanted to start. Where else but creation? Seemingly just as important as where we're going, where we came from, and why we're here. These are subjects humanity has hypothesized and debated over since we became capable of conscious thought. Every religion, every culture around the world has some belief on how it all started, and it's possible that we'll never agree on an answer. Still, it's interesting to see how our understanding of the origin shapes our worldview, whether it be intelligent design or the theory of evolution. Before we get into the theological and mythological aspects, I want to first talk about the science. When it comes to science, the origin of the universe and life itself, the most widely known theory is probably the Big Bang. In simple terms, this idea explains the universe as having started with a single point that expanded, growing to the size it is now, and is possibly still continuing to grow. The universe generating and regenerating itself endlessly. Essentially, it's a cosmic particle reaction that is still occurring. In addition to the Big Bang, other theories also include the bulk theory in brain cosmology and the arrow of time. However, as I'm not as scientifically inclined as I'd like to be, I'm going to leave things here. Moving on, when it comes to religion, most of us here in the Americas are likely familiar with the biblical Genesis. Though specifics vary between individual faiths and denominations, most Judeo-Christian and Islamic practitioners believe that in the beginning God created heaven and earth, after which he created a single man and a single woman. While many cultures believe humanity started with one male and one female, other details often vary greatly. The next narrative I want to talk about is arguably the most well-known pantheon. Most of us probably learned about Greek mythology in American literature or some form of English class. The Greek gods and their predecessors, the Titans, are probably also among the greatest examples of family dysfunction. Out of the primordial chaos came Mother Earth, Gaia, and her husband Uranus, the sky. These two bore their children, Kronos and the Titans. Kronos then, with his sister wife Rhea, gave birth to who were commonly known as the core Greek gods. However, fear of their own children overthrowing them would become a recurring theme among the heads of the Greek family. Uranus would betray his offspring, imprisoning the majority in Tartarus. However, this resulted in his son Kronos eventually killing him. This cycle would only repeat with Kronos eating his children and his son Zeus in turn castrating and killing him. But after a prophecy about his firstborn from his first wife Metis, Zeus too feared his child overthrowing him and turned her into a fly, swallowing her whole. The next pantheon a lot of people are probably partially familiar with through the Marvel movies. In Norse mythology, you have Thor and Odin, two of the Norse gods. Well, this cosmos started with a giant gaping abyss. This abyss existed between the lands of elemental fire and elemental ice. Well, frost from one side and flames from the other mixed in the center of the abyss, causing drops of melted ice to form Ymir, the first of the destructive god giants. The massive Ymir then, all on his own, gave birth to more giants from, well, his arms and the sweat of his armpits as he slept. Gross, but this is mythology, and it's one of the things that I love about it. A sacred cow then emerged from the melting frost, sustaining Ymir with her milk. She was able to nourish herself by licking the remaining ice and slowly uncovered Buri, the first of the Aesir gods. The Aesir is the proper name for the Norse pantheon of gods. Bork, the son of Buri, and his wife, the giant Besla, gave birth to Odin, who would become chief of the Aesir gods. Odin and his brothers would kill Ymir and form the world with Ymir's remains. Ymir's blood would become the oceans, his skin and muscles became the land, and his hair became plant life. Even his brains became the clouds, while his skull became the sky. Later, Oscar and Mbala, the first man and woman, would be fashioned by the gods from two tree trunks and protected from the wrath of the giants by a fence surrounding their home in Midgard, what we know as Earth. In a somewhat different cosmology most of us are probably not aware of, Cherokee creation stories say that the Earth began as a great floating island surrounded by seawater, hanging from the sky with cords attached to the four cardinal points. At first, everything was water. All animals lived above it in the sky. The Earth first came to be when a water beetle left the sky realm to see what lied beneath. Finding no solid place to rest, it dived below the water and returned to the top with soft mud. The mud then expanded, becoming the Earth as we know it. In this story, it's also said that after the world has grown old and begins to decay, humanity will die off and the cords will fall apart, leaving the Earth to return to the ocean. On a side note, the story of the first humans were said to be brother and sister. Well, the sister gave birth to a child every 7 days after her brother, hitting her with a fish, asked her to multiply. Well, in a short time after that, there were too many people, so ever since, women have only been able to have one child a year. In Yoruba theology, a creation story states that only the sky existed above and the water and marshlands existed below. Olorun ruled the sky and Olokun ruled below. Obatala and a number of other deities were asked to go to Earth to help prepare it for sustaining life. After receiving advice from Orunmila, the eldest son and god of prophecy, on how to achieve this. Obatala gathered everything he was told he would need. He hung the gold chain he found from a corner of the sky, and with the bag he carried, began climbing down. After reaching the end of the chain, with still some distance to go, Obatala heeded Orunmila's directions. He poured sand from the snail shell he was carrying and released the white hen in his possession. The sand immediately formed dry land wherever it fell, and the white hen began scratching and spreading it everywhere. Obatala was able to jump onto a bigger pile of sand, which had become a hill, and he named this hill Ife. After growing the first plants, time passed, and growing lonely, Obatala decided he wanted to create beings similar to himself. So from the sand and clay, much like in the Christian narrative, he began the process of molding human figures, but quickly grew tired, so took a break. Unfortunately, he drank several bowls of wine he had fashioned from a nearby palm tree and returned to his task now drunk. Because of his intoxicated state, the humans he created were imperfect and flawed. He then unwittingly called for his father Olorun to breathe life into his creations. But after sobering up the next day, Obatala realized his mistake. Vowing to never drink again, he swore to become the protector of the deformed from then on. In Japanese Shinto, one of the primary influences in my first novel, it's described that the universe started with the separation of pure light elements from heavier earthly elements, after which 3 kami, Japanese gods, were born. Soon other kami arose, including Izanagi and Izanami, who were instructed by the rest to create land on Earth. The siblings formed the Inaugural island by steering the sea with a giant jeweled spear. The 2 of them came to Earth, where Izanami gave birth to even more kami. But during the birth of a fire kami, Izanami died. Izanagi traveled to the underworld after her, but his seeing her decaying form, when he had already promised not to look, only outraged Izanami. She chased him out of the cave entrance, and he sealed her inside with a boulder. The narrative continues with Izanagi creating humans and Izanami cursing them, vowing to kill 1,000 people a day, Izanagi swearing to create 1,500 a day in response. After the whole situation with the cave, Izanagi sought to purify himself of the encounter by bathing in the sun. This caused him to give birth to the Sun Kami Amaterasu from his left eye, the Moon Kami Tsukiyomi from his right eye, and the Storm Kami Susanoo from his nose. In Mayan stories, 2 gods known as the Makers sought to create an earthbound race that looked like them. However, the first attempt at making humans with mud quickly fell apart. The second attempt using wood succeeded initially, but these people were soulless and refused to obey the gods, so the gods in turn destroyed them with rain. And the third, final attempt, humanity was formed from maize, the sacred food of the Mayans. In Egyptian creation myths, the world was believed to have emerged from a lifeless sea when the sun arose for the first time. However, different stories claim different gods as responsible for this. Among these are the 8 primordial gods, Yogzud, the creator god, Atum, who was said to have created himself from nothing, the god of craftsmen, Ptah, and the god of the sun and air, Amun. These different cosmologies and understandings of creation, though different to varying degrees, often complemented one another. Admittedly, I've barely scratched the surface. There are way more stories that I would like to get into. Some are exceedingly vast and complex, but as this is my first episode and I want to keep it fairly brief, I'll save the rest to explore later. Some of these stories I've mentioned, you could probably already notice similar themes. Creation being born from the abyss or sea, human beings being created from mud or other earthly materials, even people being wiped out by the gods with a flood. Another reoccurring narrative I want to discuss on another day. Next week, we'll be talking about trickster deities, Anansi, and the forms of storytelling from different cultures. For now, Assalamu alaikum and namaste, peace be with you until we meet again. Thanks for listening to me as I've nerded out about stories and belief. Join me next week as I journey down the rabbit hole once again by subscribing and listening wherever podcasts are available. Who knows, maybe then we'll be one step closer to glimpsing the true nature of faith and fear. Music courtesy of Pixabay.com.